Hello, everyone, and welcome to this international meeting on the definition of bullying, co-organized by UNESCO and the World Anti-Bullying Forum. So I hope you can see me because I can't see myself. My name is Christophe Cornu. I work in the education sector at UNESCO, more precisely in the section of health and education. I know many of you today, and so good to see you again, even virtually, and nice to meet other people. So as Frida Varg, the managing director of the World Anti-Bullying Forum, will explain shortly, this meeting is the second one of 4 virtual meetings on bullying that we organized together this year. And can I have the second slide, please? So this meeting is a bit particular, unlike the other meetings, because we decided that it would be a closed door meeting that involves only a small number of experts, and particularly experts who were involved in the consultation that was organized last year in preparation for the International Conference on School Bullying that took place in November, and which coincided with the celebration for the first time of the UNESCO International Day Against Violence and Bullying at School, including cyberbullying. So, of course, participants who were not involved in the consultation are very welcome today. So, as you know, we published a short document on the occasion of the conference, summarizing the recommendations that were developed by a scientific committee who prepared the conference. And some of the members of the scientific committee are here with us today. And these recommendations, including suggestions on why and how the definition of bullying could or should be revisited. And James O'Higgins-Norman, the co-chair of the scientific committee, will provide more background on this a bit later. Can I have the next slide, please? So the recommendations by the scientific committee on preventing and addressing school bullying and cyberbullying are the most recent document in a series of reports that UNESCO has been publishing over the last 10 years on bullying and on school violence more generally. You can see on the slide the cover pages of some of these documents. So the purpose of these documents has been to compile and analyze the most comprehensive, relevant, up-to-date data on school violence and bullying. It has been to document good, promising and good practices from all over the world so that ministries of education and other stakeholders can make evidence-based decisions. And finally, the role of these documents has been to provide a clear, better, and perhaps more harmonized conceptual framework at global level for people to understand better what school violence means, what bullying really is. And because we know that without a good understanding of these phenomena, without operational definitions that most people share, it's very difficult to come up with an effective response. And also, we acknowledge the fact that school violence and bullying are phenomena that keep evolving, and that's also science and research on school violence and bullying prevention is evolving. So that's why today UNESCO is very proud to co-host this meeting on the definition of bullying. And I'm going to hand over to Frida Varg, who is going to introduce the World Anti-Bullying Forum and also present the rationale for these meetings and that we organize together and the objectives of our meetings. Frida, over to you.
Thank you, Christophe. I hope that you can hear me and see me.
Yeah, we can.
Thank you. So my name is Frida Varg, and I'm the Managing Director for the World Anti-Bullying Forum. And I'm very happy to welcome all of you today. I'm very excited about this meeting and seeing and talking to all of you. Well, the World Anti-Bullying Forum is an initiative from started by the Swedish organization, the NGO Friends, that works against bullying. And every 2 years, we gather practitioners, policymakers, and researchers from various research fields in order to bridge the gap and facilitate dialogue between different stakeholders, between the research community and the practitioners and the policymakers, so that we all can come closer to a world with no bullying. This year, 2021, we are organizing the World Anti-Bullying Forum together with the Norwegian organization Partnership Against Bullying, which is an initiative from various organizations in Norway. And we are very happy that we will be organizing the forum this year together with them in Stockholm, Sweden. And don't worry if you will not be able to travel and come to Sweden in November. This will be a hybrid event, so all of you are welcome to participate on site or online. And I can just mention that the registration is open for this. So next slide, please. We do this, the World Anti-Bullying Forum, in order to stop bullying and other forms of violence between children in accordance with the Convention of the Rights of the Child and the Global Sustainable Goals, of course. And we think that the best way to do that is to share knowledge, the best available knowledge about how bullying among children can be prevented, and that we all do that in these different areas that we all are working in, whether it be the research community, or if you're a practitioner, or if you're a policymaker or another stakeholder. And we want to make this knowledge easily accessible globally and digitally. You can go to the next slide, please. And as Christoph mentioned before, we are together with UNESCO co-hosting this international meeting this year. And they are organized as stepping stones to the Third World Anti-Bullying Forum in November. So we had the first one in March, and now today we have this one, and then there will be two more, one in July and one in September, one about children and disabilities and bullying, and one about the role of teachers. And the rationale for this and the objectives are to trigger discussions that we can continue at the World Anti-Bullying Forum in November. And my colleague Magnus Loftsson will summarize this meeting in the end, and he will tell you more about our ideas and our thoughts for the next steps leading up to the World Anti-Bullying Forum. But I just wanted to say that I'm really happy that we will discuss the bullying definition today. It's a very important topic that will make us all better equipped to fight bullying. And I remember in the 2017 World Anti-Bullying Forum, there was a keynote panel that, among other things, discussed the definition of bullying, and it made us even more certain that we need to continue to talk about this. And we're very happy that we, together with UNESCO, can be facilitators to taking steps into the future and create a more inclusive and more comprehensive ideas about the definition of school bullying. And I hope that we will have fruitful discussions today, and that we can continue them in Stockholm, on site or online in the conference platform in November. Looking forward to today. Thank you to all of you, and I will hand back over to you, Christoph.
Yeah, thank you, Frida. Next slide, please. So here you can see the speakers who will be involved in this meeting. I mean, I will introduce them in due course. Next slide, please. So today we had 43 people registered. I have a look at the list. We currently actually have 34 people. So we have members of the scientific committee of the World Anti-Bullying Forum. We have members of the scientific committee who prepared the conference last year. We have members of the panel of experts who were involved in the preparation of the conference. We have UNESCO staff, and we have other people registered. And again, you are very welcome. Next slide, please. So now, what do we want to achieve during this meeting? Well, basically, this meeting is an opportunity to discuss the reasons for revisiting the current definition of bullying, to discuss the elements that should be considered in the process of establishing a revised definition based on the recommendations I mentioned before, and also based on other research that has been conducted over the last few years. And also we want, with this meeting, to start to explore the appetite of the research community, and not just the research community, but also practitioners, people from NGOs, people from ministries, this appetite for revised definition, and also the process that could be put in place. And Magnus Loftsson will tell us a few words about the process at the end of the meeting. So we want to be very clear that at the end of this meeting, we won't have a revised definition of bullying, because that would be very ambitious and not realistic at all. This is really, as Frida mentioned, a stepping stone. Then there will be a follow-up process until the World Anti-Bullying Forum. Next slide, please. So in terms of the structure of the program, we're going to start with 3 presentations that will provide us with kind of a food for thought in terms of the current thinking on the rationale for revisiting the definition of bullying and suggestions for revised definition. So we will hear three different perspectives. The one from the scientific committee who prepared the consultation. It will be James O'Higgins-Norman and Christian Berger, who will share the recommendations from the scientific committee. The second presentation will be delivered by Professor Dorothy Espelage. She's a professor of education at the University of North Carolina. She has written many articles, books, chapters on different forms of violence, including bullying, sexual harassment, dating violence, etc. And she will provide her perspective based on research conducted in the US, particularly research that has been conducted within the framework of a project led by the US Centers for Disease Control. And finally, we'll listen to Dr. Elizabeth C. Payne. She's the founder and director of the Queering Education Research Institute. She's currently an education faculty at the City University of New York, and she will speak based on all the research she has conducted on bullying targeting students who are LGBTIQ, and more broadly on linkages between bullying and gender norms. So after these three presentations, we'll have some time for questions and answers, questions of clarification. Then we'll have some time for discussion. Professor Robert Thornburg to give us, provide us with the first analysis of what he thinks the commonalities and differences are based on the three presentations. Then we'll have a question for you, and then we'll move into group work. And I will explain a bit later what the group work will focus on and how we will work in small groups. Then Professor Thornburg will come in again, will provide a kind of global analysis of the outcomes of the discussions, what he thinks are the key outcomes when it comes to revisiting the definition of bullying. And then Magnus Lofsson will explain a little bit, as Frida and I mentioned before, the next steps toward the World Anti-Bullying Forum. So in terms of communications, you can use the chat box whenever you want, post your questions, your comments. We may not be able to take all the questions and address all the comments during the plenaries, but we'll do our best. And anyway, as I said, there will be a follow-up process. There will be a report based on this meeting that will be shared. I mean, by the way, the meeting is recorded. I forgot to mention this before. So there will be a report based on our discussions that will be shared. And so please don't feel frustrated if not all the questions and comments are covered by the meeting. So without further delay, we're going to move to the first presentation. As I said, this is the first perspective. It's going to be Professor James O'Higgins-Norman. He's the director of the National Anti-Bullying Research and Resource Center at Dublin City University. He also holds the UNESCO Chair on Tackling Bullying in Schools and the Cyberspace, which was created 2 years ago. And he was the co-chair of the scientific committee who was pulled together for the preparation of the International Conference on School Bullying. You can see the names on the slide of all the people who were involved in the scientific committee, and one of them was Professor Christian Berger, who will also deliver part of this presentation. Christian is an associate professor in education psychology at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, and Christian has worked a lot on the effects of peer norms on aggression and bullying. So the floor is yours, James and Christian. Thank you.
Thank you, Christophe, for that warm introduction. And I'm delighted to be here today to spend this time with colleagues revisiting the definition of bullying. And I speak, I suppose, in my role as chair or co-chair of the International Scientific Committee, who worked last year on the recommendations that were published last November. So I'm just going to give some context to where we've come from and where we hope to go today and in the near future. For almost 50 years, scholars, practitioners, and policymakers alike have relied on an understanding of bullying that was strongly influenced by the foundational work of Donald Weiss and others, such as Erling Rowland and other scholars in the field, who defined bullying as unwanted aggressive behavior that is repeated over time and involves an imbalance of power or strength. And according to these definitions, this type of aggression could involve implicit or explicit intent, although the intention may not always be to hurt the target. Sometimes children and adolescents have other intentions, and the bullying behavior serves those rather than actually intending to hurt the target of the bullying behavior. It's against this significant time in the history of research on bullying that the 2020 UNESCO International Conference on School Bullying took place to mark the very first International Day against violence and bullying in schools, including cyberbullying. Next slide, please. In recent years, through the work of other scholars from different disciplines, as well as the work of the International Bullying Prevention Association, the World Anti-Bullying Forum, and UNESCO, there has been a growing recognition to adapt the current definition of bullying to reflect the need for more expansive and inclusive considerations that recognize the complexities of relationships and structures related to bullying behavior. It is this push for this needed change that the scientific committee last year echoed in our recommendations. And these suggestions to revisit the definition of bullying are not merely theoretical. By recognizing bullying as a whole education issue and a whole society issue, it is hoped that a more inclusive definition will trigger more comprehensive and targeted initiatives to tackle bullying in schools, as well as the development of appropriate research tools to measure and to understand bullying. Moving to the next slide then, on the 5th of November last year, we held the first ever International Day on School Bullying. To mark this celebration, a key global event was organized. It was the 2020 International Conference on School Bullying, co-convened by UNESCO and the French Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports. The online conference aimed to build global momentum to end bullying in schools by raising awareness of the issue, sharing what works to address it, and mobilizing governments, experts, and the educational community. For the purpose of this conference, UNESCO and the French Ministry of Education convened a scientific committee comprised of experts from different regions of the world, which are here with us today, many of them are here with us today, to lead a process to reflect on the most effective ways to address bullying and cyberbullying. 2 wide consultations were organized to inform the process, one amongst the French committee of experts and a virtual consultation among about 50 other renowned international experts from a variety of institutions, academics, representatives of governments, NGOs, and UN agencies, all to collect their opinions on what works to prevent and address bullying and cyberbullying, including scientific evidence. In other words, most of us present here today on this seminar this afternoon, we're all part of this process in one way or another, leading to those recommendations. Following the process last year, the scientific committee released a document consolidating its recommendations on preventing and addressing school bullying and cyberbullying. In addition to a whole education approach to reduce bullying and cyberbullying, these recommendations suggest revisiting the current definition of bullying to make it reflect better the complete scope of the evolution of scientific understanding over the past 50 years. And that brings us to where we are now. So I'd like to hand over to my colleague and friend, Professor Christian Berger, who will take us through the elements that we feel are important on this. Thank you.
Thank you, James, and good morning to everyone. Greetings from Chile. It's my pleasure to be here participating in this meeting. I will cover 6 aspects that the scientific committee considered that should be revisited in order to continue developing our understanding and definition of bullying, including cyberbullying. The first one has to do with the power imbalance involved in bullying. One of the core elements of the definition of bullying is the existence of an imbalance of power. This imbalance, however, does not necessarily refer to individual characteristics such as physical strength or personality traits, but to the power that the social context attributes to individuals. So bullying occurs within a system of relationships and structures that exist both within the school and outside the school. As such, there is a need to recognize that bullying is a whole education issue. In other words, power imbalance, and therefore bullying and cyberbullying, are enabled or inhibited by the social and institutional context of schools and the educational system. And this is particularly relevant for cyberbullying, where individual characteristics might be irrelevant for victimization to happen. In fact, bullying might be anonymous, and power imbalances can depend exclusively on social attributions. Next slide, please. Along with the previous consideration, bullying and cyberbullying happen within a network of individuals and interactions. In this sense, instead of focusing on dyadic or eventually the group interactions directly involved in bullying, we need to recognize that bullying and cyberbullying are relational phenomena that occur within a network of people and systems of relationships and structures that exist both within the school and outside the school. In this sense, these phenomena are not limited to those who directly participate in it. And this builds on the participation rules approach that might go beyond proximal relationships. Next slide, please. A key aspect that we wanted to stress is that traditionally, bullying has been defined by aggressive actions, either physical or relational, directed to the target. However, and building on the previous consideration of bullying and cyberbullying as relational phenomena, they go beyond aggression and often imply an absence of effective or positive responses and care towards targets by peers and adults. In this sense, bullying and cyberbullying are not only determined by the presence of aggression, but also by the absence of care, and we should include this in a revised definition. Next slide, please. The next issue I want to address is harm, and it is important to stress that actual harm caused by bullying. Indeed, bullying and cyberbullying often cause emotional, social, and physical harm, and we need to address that. However, when considering harm, the definition of bullying and cyberbullying should not focus solely on the behaviors involved. Instead, it must acknowledge the consequences for all actors. In this sense, harm does not only refer to targets, but also to other participants. For instance, bystanders who experience fear and feel unable to protect their peers. So we need to address harm in a more inclusive way. Next slide, please. The next issue that is key in definition of bullying is repetition. Bullying and cyberbullying do not refer to isolated events or situations, as we know, but repetition is not exclusively related to the number of bullying events. It implies that where bullying becomes a relational pattern over time. So when bullying relationship is established, the target does not need to be actually bullied to experience fear and consequently emotional and social harm. This is particularly relevant in light especially of new technologies and the increase of cyberbullying, in which repetition of force is different. A revised definition should also make clear that repetition is not only linked to the number of or times of the incidents of bullying and cyberbullying occur, but to the fear of the target that a once-off event might be repeated or reshared online. A revised definition should therefore be adapted to translate the reality of new technologies into bullying dynamics and how they play along. Next one, please. And the last element we want to stress in this revised definition we should consider is the idea of intentionality, notion of intentionality. Although bullying and cyberbullying always cause harm, this does not necessarily imply intentionality. In other words, not all perpetrators of bullying act intentionally. As we mentioned before, bullying and cyberbullying occur within a certain set of relationships. Students involved in bullying may do it as a result of group dynamics rather than because they want to harm the student who is targeted. So we need to be more careful when we address intentionality and understand this is part of group dynamics. Christoph, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. You did a wonderful job because you presented all these concepts very clearly, and you managed to stick to time, which is good. So now we're going to move to a different set of slides. slides. It's going to be Professor Dorothy Espelage, so perhaps we can go get your slides, and in the meantime, I'm going to, while we change the slides, I'm going to introduce you again. So as I said before, Dorothy, are you there? Yeah, so Dorothy Espelage is a distinguished professor of education at the University of North Carolina. She was recently elected to the National Academy of Education in the US. And as I said, she's written a huge number of articles, books, chapters, not just on bullying, but also on different forms of violence. And Dorothy is a member of the World Anti-Bullying Forum Scientific Committee. Dorothy, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone from the United States. I see so many of my friends across the panel. Marilyn is right there, so she's cheering me on. It's good to see you. I hope everyone is well and healthy. I'm very honored to be asked to talk about the work that was conducted by the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, and constantly are having conversations with the very experts that are attending today about this redefinition, revisiting. So thank you very much for this honor. We are here because of the prolific Dan Olivas, who we lost this last year, because we all had that starting point of his definition of bullying. And in some ways, I encourage us to, and I think this is what we're doing, expanding from this, certainly beautiful decades of research, where he argued that it was aggressive behavior that was intentionally harm-doing, which we've already heard those constructs being mentioned by Christian, which is carried out repeatedly over time in an interpersonal relationship characterized by an imbalance of power. In so many ways of what just Christian mentioned, those features of intentional aggression, repetition, and imbalance of power, here we are again in 2021, reconsidering these components and hopefully expanding them to be more inclusive as UNESCO has proposed. So for several years, an international, although this Centers for Disease Control, United States kind of version of the CDC, certainly there's international focuses on CDC, we convened for several years. This was an ongoing meeting. We had Ian Rivers that came that represented Europe in some ways, Wendy Craig from Canada, and then other folks across the United States. Like many of us, we started with Dan Olivas's definition and deviated very little at the end of the couple years that we convened. And so we rested with this definition that remember, this is a research definition too. So I think we need to be clear as we have these conversations of what is the intent of this definition. Research definitions across the globe differ from policy definitions, should they differ, but the reality is they do. So we settled with an imbalance of real or perceived power that favors the aggressor. Repeated, but we also added has a high likelihood of being repeated, bringing in the developmental research that shows that many kids change their behavior to minimize the risk of that repetition. So how do we consider that? There was very little debate on this panel of whether or not being a target of bullying contributed to these adverse outcomes of intimidation and being demeaned and humiliated. Now, when Christian started his talk this morning, he talked about elements. And so what you don't see in this definition is the 200-page document that backs this definition up from Centers for Disease Control. And I remember and recall having heated conversations with Wendy Craig out of Canada of really pushing for relational dynamics. I do want to hold on to that nugget that Christian was talking about, that this really does unfold within the context of groups, of dyadic relationships, of fearful bystanders. How do we hold on to that? That didn't rest and it didn't settle within this definition, but certainly the 200 pages that support this definition argued for certain elements. So I think we need to think about what should be in the definition versus what are those various components and elements that we may use to bolster this definition. Unfortunately, what we've done globally is to not really do really good experimental work around the definition. I show you this slide only to say that Michelle Yabara in the United States has tried within her national representative samples to manipulate this definition to really come in to understand, are the components that we have argued, that Dan Olivas has argued for decades, really critical aspects related to that harm that we're going to talk about. Bottom line, in these experiments, in these nationally representative samples of 12 to 17-year-olds and 13 to 18-year-olds, as we took the components of power and repetition and added that within the manipulation of the experiment, we found that as you added these components, children had increased daily interference of depression, anxiety. So there is something unique, at least in these set of experiments, of that differential power and repetition. Just to hold on to that.
You have 3 minutes left, Dorothy. 3 minutes left.
Great, thank you. And there's going to be a longer PowerPoint that we'll provide. I'm just going to set the stage here in my next 3 minutes. I also want to call attention to yet another Canadian, Volk, who talked about a definition of aggressive, goal-directed behavior that harms another individual within the context of a power imbalance. And what Volk and his lab really struggled with is, how do we measure intentionality? So we removed that and replaced it with those concrete goals. And then also recognizing that harm is the perception from the victim that relates, as Christian said, to both frequency and intensity of the bullying behavior. Something for us to consider as we go through our discussions today. I also want to end here to think about, where does our theory fit as we're moving forward and revisiting the definition? All of us come to the table as bullying researchers with biases. Christian pushes for relational dynamics because he studies the dyad in the group. Similar for me. Some of us, and Dr. Payne will follow me here, some of us really take this more gendered lens and see that bullying doesn't happen just in a vacuum, but it's a precursor, it's a consequence of some larger societal institutional dynamic, which may be gendered. And so I think as we move forward here, think about our biases, our theoretical frameworks. What do we want to do with this definition? Do we want to think about not necessarily holding on to those real key components that have been there since the work of the pioneering work of Dan Olivas, or do we want to push the field forward, thinking about our theory playing out, especially within the context of 2021 and the advent of cyberbullying? And so I look forward to our conversations today, and it's good to see everybody.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Again, you did a very good job. You have actually a long PowerPoint presentation. We will share the slides with all their participants. And now we're going to listen to the third perspective. As I said before, it's going to be Dr. Elizabeth Payne. So as I said, she's the founder and director of the Queering Education Research Institute in the US. She's currently education faculty at the City University of New York. She's a sociologist of education, and she's going to present this different perspective based on all this work that she's been doing on bullying targeting LGBTQ students. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone, and I am so honored to be here with all of you. This topic is something that is really important to our work at the Queering Education Research Institute, and also really important to me. So I appreciate being able to be a part of this. So I'm going to start with our common cultural understanding of bullying. If you change the slide, please. Our common cultural understandings of bullying focus on individual acts of violence and the individuals involved. So the bully, the victim, and often the bystanders. Bullying is seen as antisocial behavior, and the strategies to address it include intervening in individual events and remediation. Now, by common understanding, I'm referring to the ways educators and policymakers and the public generally think about bullying. Can you change the slide, please? Hold on one Most educators and policymakers accept the dominant cultural understanding of bullying. Bullies and their aggressive behavior and intolerant attitudes are seen as the only problem. Policies based on this understanding of the problem focus on bodies and behaviors within school spaces, but fail to raise accountability for recognizing and addressing structural bias and patterns of targeting rooted in heterosexism, racism, sexism, etc. Can you change the slide? A sociological understanding of bullying expands beyond individuals to look at the cultural context in which bullying occurs. Bullying behaviors are highly social acts that maintain the boundaries for normal within a given context. Peer-to-peer aggression polices norms and is part of the day-to-day reality of children and youth and adults. Low-level, norm-based aggressions circulate through a variety of social interactions and are so common that they are hardly noticeable to most people. Can you change the slide? Injurious speech utilizes recognizable words that mark already stigmatized identities and ways of being within a culture. This targeting speech produces a social, not just an individual effect. Language rooted in sexism and homophobia target both individuals and the larger group of gender and sexual nonconforming students, which then places them in lower positions within the social hierarchy. So this means when kids and adults joke or tease about who is masculine or feminine in the right way, they're navigating, enforcing, and reinforcing the gender rules of the school's social hierarchy, and they are perpetuating stigma. The rules are learned from infancy, and they are embedded in every facet of culture, family, visual media, music, religion, school, etc. Can you change the slide, please? Between 2008 and 2011, our research team collected lists of bad names from high school students in urban and suburban schools about 250 miles away from New York City. There were 113 names that appeared more than once on the lists. Though our prompt to students did not include any mention of gender or sexuality, each of the bad names they shared with us was some sort of, often very creative, slut-shaming, heteronormative critique of women's bodies, or anti-LGBTQ slur. Can you change the slide, please? So the continuous—
We have 4 minutes left, Elizabeth.
I will make it.
Okay.
So the continuous circulation of bad names provides youth with repeated reminders of who and what is desirable. Minor examples of verbal policing are perceived by society to be harmless, and virtually everyone is a participant. More overt targeting is an escalated, more violent version of the same policing, and is usually a persistent, aggressive labeling of ways of being that are not perceived as normal in a particular context. The low-level aggressions are often warnings signaling what will not be tolerated. Can you change the slide, please? So this system of norm regulation reflects the value lessons students learn throughout childhood and adolescence about who counts and who doesn't. Stigmatized difference is the target of bullying behaviors. Most anti-bullying approaches ignore patterns of targeting and fail to address how certain types of difference are marked as less than in a particular school context. Change the slide, please. We have been reworking and working with a framing of bullying, and our definition is really more of a description and some points for consideration. Bullying is visible aggression that is escalated from a larger system of low-level or covert normalized aggression that polices the boundaries between normal and different in a specific social context. Targeted persons are victimized because they are perceived to be outside of the boundaries of normal as culturally defined within a peer group. This aggression can be, but isn't always, a tool for acquiring higher social status in a peer group. Peer-to-peer aggression typically replicates structural inequalities, and therefore patterns of targeting are likely to reflect systemic marginalization along the lines of gender, sex, sexuality, race, ethnicity, disability, religious affiliation, and class. Bullying frequently reinforces gender norms, ideas about correct and normal masculinity and femininity. Students who are viewed as having non-normative gender and by extension sexuality in a specific peer context are often the targets. Individuals who are targeted are likely bullied or marginalized by multiple students because of their perceived difference. Not all aggressive behaviors between students can be termed bullying. So in other words, the violence termed bullying is the heightened and visible form of aggression that circulates every day in schools and in the larger culture. Aggression that targets appearance, personal interests and hobbies, academic engagement, bodily comportment, physical size and shape, and sexual behavior in ways that continuously reassert the right way to be and affirm the expected alignment of race, class, ability, sex, gender, and sexuality. At Query, we are interested in the ways the definition of bullying impacts educator engagement with bullying and their engagement in supporting gender and sexual minority students. We are also interested in anti-bullying policy language and the ways that policy implementation is envisioned within the constraints of the dominant understanding of bullying. So our engagement with definitions is coming from this place. And the last slide is some of our writing on this approach to bullying that we've done in recent years, if anyone is interested in a sociological approach to LGBTQ bullying. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You also did a wonderful job, not just in terms of the content, but also in managing to stick to the time. So, and I thought it was really inspiring. At UNESCO, we're doing a lot of work on gender-based violence, including gender-based bullying, and I'm sure that some of my colleagues are here on the call, and this was music to their ears. I mean, I found really fascinating this word cloud that you presented based on research. So now we have 10 minutes for questions and answers to the 4 speakers who just presented. After the 10 minutes, we'll have our discussant, Professor Robert Thornburg, will give us a kind of a first analysis. I mean, all of us, obviously, we have our own analysis of what was presented, but Robert Thornburg will help us digest this information. But right now, the floor is open. So if you can use the raise hand function if you want to ask a question. Please introduce yourself, go straight to the point so that we can take more questions and that we can allow time for responses. And just to clarify, this is really for clarification. So at this stage, we're not going to discuss whether we agree or disagree with what was presented. A bit later, there will be group work. And as I said, this is part of a process. So now it's really questions for the speakers to clarify, to ask questions about what they presented. So please go ahead. I don't see any hands for now. So if there are no hands, if some of the speakers want to, oh, Christian, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I have a common question to Dorothy. I was intrigued by your point of the different perspectives and backgrounds coming onto this discussion. So you named two, but so what do you think are the most prevalent ones in this at this moment in really final definition?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so I propose, I gave a few, right, of social learning and thinking about the family context or the peer context. And, you know, I have that bias and lean toward the gender-based lens because that's my bias. But I think I would actually say the relational. I keep going back to this debate that we had in our convenings at CDC and Wendy talking about some of the classic work that she did with Deb Pepler and and of course that was in the 90s, right? And then the work that you've done and Phil Rotkin did around this relationship and the work we do around social networks. And so I think it's still coming back to that relational group dynamic. How do we capture that within a definition, knowing that that's an important element? And I think that that also helps explain a lot of what Dr. Payne was just talking about, right? Like you can't separate that from the larger group norms. So I would say that, yeah, I would rest with that. If I had to pick one, it would be around the relational dynamics.
Any more questions?
I have a question for Elizabeth, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Elizabeth, you were talking about how the behavior that we call bullying behavior acts as a kind of a way of, I suppose, making those who don't conform to the normative gender roles and the normative culturally accepted behaviors. It's a way of kind of othering them. But would you also agree that it's also a way of reminding those who conform with the normative script of how they should behave as well? That it's not. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it is. The absence of harassment is also a type of reward for conformity. So, it affects everyone in the environment, not just the students who are the targets. And this is one of the reasons why we want to look beyond the way that teachers typically think about bullying. They typically think about the bully victim binary, and sometimes they expand that to include bystanders, but they rarely think about the impact on the entire school community and how the culture is impacted by this ongoing narration of who fits and who doesn't within boxes of acceptability in the school.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a question or comment from Magnus Lofsson, who is the chair of the scientific committee of the World Anti-Bullying Forum. And remember that if you are shy, you can also include questions or comments in the chat box. You don't have to show up on the screen. So Magnus, over to you, please.
Thank you. I just want to take the chance. I'm thinking about different forms of aggression and different forms of violences. And when in the CDC definition, it was very clear that this is bullying and this is not bullying. And they also, you did a great work on clarifying how is bullying different from other forms of violences. And I think lately there's also been a lot of discussion about violences among and against children, different forms of aggression like gender-based violence, bullying, hate speech, racist violence. How should we handle all this? I mean, should there be connected or should it be different definitions? I just want to ask Dorothy, and if someone else want to comment, please do.
Yeah, so Magnus, it's such an interesting comment because we're really struggling with those gray areas and the overlap. Because of the presence of social media during a pandemic. For example, I'm working with TikTok to figure out what's the difference between bullying and hate crimes and hazing and these types of things that's happening now. Hate speech, this is what's concerning to Centers for Disease Control, and maybe that you've thought about this, is that there's a fear that if we take something as serious as hate speech and label it bullying, that somehow we will be watering down that real problematic. So I think we have to be careful. That CDC, there was some push to include bullying within dating relationships, bullying within sibling relationships. Well, sometimes the bullying within sibling relationship is downright adverse childhood experience and abuse. And then, you know, is it a slippery slope when we say bullying within a dating relationship versus saying intimate partner violence, which is protected by federal law? So I don't have the answer. I think social media folks are really struggling, and they're using algorithms and artificial intelligence to try to understand the differences. So I think it's something that we need to talk about. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, and if I may, we actually yesterday, we have colleagues at UNESCO working also on hate speech and working on prevention of violence, extremism, and they were asking me, should we also include cyberbullying? And I was like, okay, we need to be very careful, because one issue is that, for example, at UNESCO, we work a lot to support ministries of education. And if ministries of education don't understand very well the differences, is going to impact the responses, and very often the responses are different. So that would be actually a request for the group who is going to work on the revision of the definition of bullying, is to pay particular attention to cyberbullying, because it might be slightly different. And we see that there's a lot of confusion around cyberbullying, hate speech, and I feel that at this stage, there's really a need to be much more precise on what we mean by what when we use these words, because it's like now, especially also in the media, they're kind of becoming buzzwords, and I think that that would be a great contribution from the group who is going to work before the World Anti-Bullying Forum. And actually, I think during the World Anti-Bullying Forum would be interesting to have something more precise, not just questions, but some answers. So are there any more questions? We have, actually, we have 10 seconds left before we move to the next sequence. So now, this was kind of a very, I mean, for me, all these discussions are very, very exciting, very inspiring, but sometimes it's a lot to digest. So now we're going to help you digest with a discussant, Professor Robert Thornburg, who is going to share his views about what he listened, and obviously based on all the work he's been doing. I mean, Professor Robert Thornburg is a professor of education at the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Learning at Linköping University in Sweden. He's a member of the Committee for Educational Sciences at the Swedish Research Council. And he's been doing work on conducting research on bullying for the last 10 years. And he's also a member of the World Anti-Bullying Forum Scientific Committee. So now, Robert, the floor is yours for 5 minutes to share your thoughts about what you've been listening so far. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think when I listened to the presentations and also reading the presentation material, it struck me, sorry, my phone is calling me right now. So it struck me that one thing that is a kind of recurrent pattern is that the presentators draw the attention to the problem with intention to inflict harm. And that is, I mean, something that we have had a discussion in decades, how can we measure that? How can we conceptualize that? And if that is something that will limit our understanding of bullying. So focusing on harm that bullying caused instead of intention to inflict harm is something that I'm listening to now, and it echoes a classic debate in moral philosophy. My intentions of my actions versus the consequences of my actions. And in addition to that, Christian talked about the absence of care and that not all perpetrators act intentionally, but might be influenced by group dynamics. And Dorothy talked about Vaux and his colleagues' definition, in which they talked about goal-directed behavior that harms another individual, instead of using the concept of intention to inflict harm. And Elizabeth, focusing on societal norms and microaggression driven by those norms as behind bullying rather than individual intention to inflict harm. And I totally agree that this is the most troublesome definition criteria of Olivas' definition of bullying, the criteria about intention to inflict harm. How can we collect valid data on intention to inflict harm, particularly if we measure self-reported bullying victimization? In other words, asking the targets to interpret perpetrators' intentions. On the other hand, how can we collect valid data on emotional, social, and physical harm from the target's perspective if we measure self-reported bullying perpetration? In other words, asking the perpetrators to interpret whether their targets may feel and experience something. So this is tricky, of course, but still there are really problems with intentions. I mean, how conscious are the kids in what they are doing about their intentions? As Carrera and colleagues asks, where do the joke ends and the abuse begins? And I'm doing a lot of research about moral disengagement and its association with bullying, and several studies have found a clear correlation with moral disengagement and bullying. And some of the mechanisms in moral disengagement are euphemistic labeling and distortion of consequences. And when people can convince themselves that what we are doing have no negative or harmful consequences, then we do not need any intention to inflict harm either. Or if we think that what we are doing is not bullying, we are just joking, and we believe that, then there is no intention to inflict harm as well. Rigby suggests a distinction between malign and non-malign bullying, where the former is pretty much in line with Olivas' definition, while the later refers to bullying in which the perpetrators are unaware that they are doing harm to the target. So a commonality is problematizing intention to inflict harm, focusing on harm, the consequences, the marginalization, the stigma, and the target's perspectives. Another thing that I noticed was Dorothy pointed to the so-called dose effect, meaning that children who are frequently involved in bullying during childhood as chronic targets are at a greater risk of adverse outcomes compared to occasional targets. So both intensity and frequency of harm need to be recognized, as studies indicate that severity, repetition, and the presence of power imbalance lead to more severe outcome for the target. So bullying has to be taken seriously as severe cases of peer aggression and peer victimization. And another commonality is the importance of repetition. Even though there is a discussion how to conceptualize that it is not only in number of incidents, but also in terms of high likelihood of being repeated and targets fear of possible repetition. Another thing that
Robert,
is,
we'll have to stop now.
All right.
Yes, but you will have more time. I mean, if
Sure.
you haven't had time, you'll have more time at the end. So thank you for this kind of not summary, but this first analysis. So now what we're going to do is we would like to ask you a question. I mean, to all of you, to all participants, and we're going to use a Mentimeter. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this. So I'm going to ask, yes. So you, as you know, for the Mentimeter, you have a link that you can use You can use either on your laptop, on your mobile phone, any other digital device. So find the website, www.menti.com, and then please answer the following questions. The following question, there's only one. What are the key elements that should be considered when revisiting the definition of school bullying? So it can be anything that has been discussed so far, or it can be something that you feel strongly about that hasn't been mentioned so far. And you need to use once you reach the website, you need to use the code that is on the screen, 1821-1466. So then after you respond, we will see a word cloud. We will have a quick look at the word cloud, but we won't comment on it. It will be Robert again at the end, who will draw some conclusions based on the word cloud. So I can see already some of so it's actually not a cloud. It's more like but that doesn't matter. We can see interesting things coming up. So just another few seconds for you, all of you, to respond. Again, things that have been discussed, things that haven't been discussed. And Robert will use this word cloud for his second round of thoughts or analysis a bit later during this meeting. So another 30 seconds before we close. So can we actually have a word cloud, or is it the way it's going to look? I'm just asking my colleagues. I mean, that doesn't matter.
It's the way it's going to look, because otherwise a word cloud, the participants will not have the possibility to answer with replies that long.
Okay, so it's not a cloud, but still interesting. Okay, well, thank you. So we'll have can we have just a quick look at everything, all of us? Okay. So we can see things that came up before, some new stuff. Okay, can you scroll down, please? Okay, so Robert, you'll have more time to comment on this a bit later. Okay, so now we're going to, if I can have the slides again, we're going to move to the most interactive part of this meeting. We're going to work in groups. So we're going to be divided into 4 groups, as you can see on the slide. Each one of you has been pre-assigned to one of the 4 groups when you registered. This is really to save time. So each group will have a facilitator, will be one of the speakers. I will give the names a bit later. When you are in a breakout room, you will have to choose a rapporteur. That will be your first task. And then each group will have 20 minutes for discussion according to the instructions that will be given to you. And then there will be a report back in plenary, 3 minutes for the summary of discussions. And I'm going to now explain what is going to be discussed in each group. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so basically in each group, you will have to discuss up to 2 suggested changes that emerge from the presentations. These changes considered in revisiting the definition of bullying. There may be overlaps in the themes between groups. And for each suggested change to the definition of bullying, we would like to answer the 2 following questions. if this change was made to the definition of bullying, what could be the positive implications for anti-bullying interventions and or for research, and why? And second questions, if this change was made to the definition of bullying, what could be the negative consequences to anti-bullying, for anti-bullying interventions and for research, and why? So why did we decide to ask these questions? Well, because basically making changes to the definition of bullying shouldn't be a theoretical exercise. I mean, there are lots of researchers involved in this meeting, but if any changes are made, this is not just this for the sake of theory, it's because the revised definition should help design and implement policies and programs that are more relevant, that are more effective. So, which is why we want really to focus on positive and negative implications for interventions, but also keeping in mind research. So that's really the discussion that will happen within each group. And to make things easy for the rapporteurs, when you report back in plenary, you will report only on the two most important positive implications for each one of the changes you discussed, and the two top potential negative consequences of each one of the changes you will discuss. So which means that within each group, you need to discuss first, respond to two questions, and then you'll have to do a bit of ranking. So can I have the next slide, please? So here you can see the theme. So group one will discuss the power imbalance inhibited by the social and institutional context of schools and the education system, and bullying as a relational phenomenon. Group two will discuss absence of care and harm caused by bullying. And group three will discuss repetition as perceived by the target of bullying, and if time allows, also their intent, no, sorry, yes, and intent. And the group four will start by discussing intent, influenced by group dynamics, and if time allows, also repetition. So it means that there are two themes, but it's really up to each facilitator and each group to decide whether you want to cover two changes or whether you want to focus on one change. The idea is not to rush, it's really for you to have enough time to discuss. So the first group will be facilitated by James. The second group will be facilitated by Christian, the third group by Dorothy, and the fourth group by Elizabeth. So you won't have anything to do. When I give the signal, you will be directed directly in the breakout rooms. You don't have to click on anything. And after 20 minutes, you will be brought back in the plenary without having to do anything. So now my colleagues who are responsible for assigning people can do it, and we will find each other all together. We'll find in different breakout rooms. You can turn your camera on and you can unmute yourself because the groups will be very small. So we'll see now in the breakout rooms, and see you in plenary in 20 minutes. Bye.
Hi, guys.
Hi, James.
Good to see you all there. Nice to see you all, some of you again, and some of you are fresh faces. So maybe just to get started, we could just all say who we are so that people know who they're talking to. I'm going to go just call people in order of how I see you. So Yuichi, do you want to just go first?
Yes, I'm Yuichi Toda from Japan. I'm happy to see you here.
You too. And then Ina.
Hi, I'm a researcher from the University of Helsinki from Finland, and nice to see you all.
You too. Frode.
Good afternoon. I'm Frode. I'm head of secretariat for the Partnership Against Bullying in Norway.
Nice to see you. Hildegun.
Hi, I'm Hildegun Fandrem, and I'm from the University of Stavanger in Norway.
Jan.
Yes, hi, I'm Janne, and I'm also from the University of Stavanger in Norway.
Great. Bjorn.
Hi, I'm associate professor in social work from Örebro University and part of the World Anti-Bullying Forum.
Nice to meet you. Masue.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Masue from the UNSRG VAX office.
Nice to meet you.
Nice
And Sepelado.
Hello, I'm assistant of the section of health and education at UNESCO.
Nice to see you there. And Young Fen, do you want to say hello as well?
Hello, my name is Yung Feng Liu. I'm from UNESCO, providing secretariat support for this meeting. Nice meeting you all.
Thanks, Young Fen. So I think that's everybody has said hello. Have I left anybody out? No, that's great. Okay, so folks, we have 20 minutes thereabouts. The first thing we need to do is to elect a rapporteur who's going to report back to the plenary session. So would anyone like to volunteer for that position before we bully somebody into taking it on? Anybody? Okay, so everyone's very shy. So I'm going to ask, because you're appearing next to me on my screen, Jan, would you be kind enough to be our rapporteur for the meeting, please?
Okay.
Thank you for taking that on. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have some questions to discuss in relation to power imbalance, which is enabled or inhibited by the social and institutional context of schools and the wider education system. So that is and then the second one is bullying as a relational phenomenon. Bullying. So I don't know, you guys, can you guys see that on your screen? No, I don't know if I can share that on my screen. I don't know.
James, I can share the screen if you like.
Thank you, Young Fen. How are we doing there, Young Feng?
Sorry, I'm having some technical issue.
No
yeah,
problem.
here. Okay.
That's great, thank you. Okay, folks, so we have our rapporteur, Jan, which is great. So we're looking at the potential changes in regards to the definition of bullying. And what we've been asked to think about in this group is two aspects: the power imbalance and the bullying as a relational phenomenon. So how important are these for the definition of bullying? And then if these changes were made, what would be the positives and what would be the negative implications? So maybe just to start off there, we might just talk a little bit about power imbalance and how essential is that in relation to bullying. I know, like, we often say that if two individuals of fairly equal power or status are involved, then it's merely conflict rather than bullying. And that's kind of the way we've spoken about this before, but maybe we need to think a bit more about this and the extent to which power imbalance is essential for our bullying definition. So what do you guys think?
I can start if you want.
Thank you.
The first thing I have in mind when we talk about power imbalance, that we have to look at the power imbalance from more holistic perspective at the organizational level in schools or the society and so on. So we have to take it into account different mechanisms at different levels that produce this power imbalance. It could be relational, as we say, like people meet each other or school children meet each other in a social relation, but we are part of a system too. We are pupils or teachers and so on, and that positions is framed by the system as such. So when we look at imbalance of power, we have to take into account structural characteristics and personal characteristic if we talk about interactions between certain pupils or students. So that's my starting point from this.
Thank you, Bjorn. Anyone else like to follow up on that?
I add something like quickly.
Yes.
I'm thinking like it's kind of like hazy, or they're saying it first talking about social and institutional context, but then drawing it to network of school and community, because the first phrase could give idea that it's going to talk about the norm structures or social or political or ideological structures, but actually it's not there. So I'm missing a bit more about of that part of the change.
Okay, so are you saying that it's about, did you say phasing?
No, like hazy. It's hazy.
Oh, hazing,
it's not
sorry.
clear. Yeah.
It's not clear to you how the structural aspect might impact on hazing?
No, it's that they like two separate parts when they're talking about institutional context of the school and educational system. Then it could be like about the economic, social, normative structures, but it's not there. Suddenly it talks about even network of school and community, which is like more in the individual level.
Okay, thanks, Zina. Anyone want to come in on that?
I can continue.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, Hildegun, yes.
One thing I just missed in the very beginning was to mention or to say something about why we need to redefine the definition. And I'm just a little bit into this. If it's an actual behavior we are going to identify. Also, we need to identify what kind of behavior it is to find the best solution or intervention to cope with it, or to intervene, or to make things that it doesn't happen. And I was thinking that this aspect of power imbalance in institution and the context is really important, but I was just wondering if it add to the kind of understanding of the behavior that is going on. So I don't know if you got what I mean, but we need to kind of focus on the behavior and then take, of course, these aspects in account in addition to
So
to decide what to do. Yeah.
It kind of strikes me a bit, Hildegunn, a bit like chicken and egg. Where do you start with the behavior or start with the structure?
Yes, exactly.
Behavior.
Yeah, and of course we need to take into account the context and structures, but we also, but it's another thing. But maybe now I'm on the negative consequences. Yeah.
Thanks, Hildegunn. Anyone else want to come in on that?
Can I have a? Yeah, continue.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Bjorn.
Yeah, as I see it, it is important to take into account both the structural and the individual behavior, because if you are going to intervene against bullying or prevent bullying, you have to look at different levels. And I think the main problem within the bullying research is that we have different perspective as scientists, and that different perspectives create some conflicts, so to speak, when we look at different behaviors, how to measure things, how to observe things, how to do interviews with offenders or people involved in bullying. So I think the main thing is that we have to have a more open view towards different perspective of doing science as such. And as a starting point, I think that we have to recognize that we have different views on different kind of empirical data. And from my perspective, I see that it is important to both measure things and to observe and interview about consequences and so on. But it has to do that I have a certain perspective of doing science as such. And I think that most of these discussions about the concepts and articles written about the new definitions or how to conduct the research within bullying in the bullying field, we are looking at from a more methodological perspective than on the research object as such.
Okay, thanks, Bjorn. Frode, you want to come in there?
Wow, what a task, James. 20 minutes to redefine 2 points in the bullying definition. I just want to add some comments concerning the very framing of school bullying as such, because from what I understand, we're discussing a definition of school bullying. And I'm just very curious about how do we see bullying as a phenomenon versus bullying or school bullying as a phenomenon. And I'm wondering, picking up on Dorothy's point, that there are different definitions for different purposes. And is this a quest for a universal scientific definition, or are we looking for a definition that's useful to policy, or are we looking for a definition that's useful to practitioners at their operational level? And if we're looking at a definition for all of those, then I think we very much need to consider more education, not just as a context, but as the nature of the phenomenon that we're observing. So school bullying, to my mind, is different from other kinds of bullying, not just because they're in a different context, but because the very way that people behave in schools are very different from what they behave in other forms of society. So I'm just very curious, are we now discussing points in a definition of school bullying, considering just the school as a context, or are we looking for a definition to all of these levels? And my concern is more, how do we find approaches that welcome different definitions, and including how behavior in school is defined and understood as bullying?
Thank you. That's a very interesting point, because obviously I think we're talking in terms of school here, but I suppose some people will be arguing, and the scientific committee last year would have argued that the school exists within a wider set of relationships. So certain school structures and hierarchies and the way people behave and engage in school systems does impact on bullying behavior, but it's not totally divorced from the wider education system and the wider society either. But I take your point that, you know, it may be a different or a version of a different version of the definition of bullying that will be used in a school context. So that is an interesting question for sure. Yuichi, did you want to come in there?
Thank you very much. From 2013, our nationwide research system is applying 2 levels of recognition definition of bullying. One is possible cases. We collect every possible cases of bullying and report them. And also severe cases, we focus on the severe cases and report them. So before that, we had just applied 1 norm to report, but after that, we are planning 2 norms to recognize bullying, because the situation and power balance is fluid. So sometimes in the movie of the interactions, if we see one clear-cut still picture, the scene of just before is very much different from the scene of the still picture. So that's why the situation is fluid. And if we pick up every possible cases, so many are chosen. But sometimes some cases are fixed and one target is continuing. So in such cases, we see the severe case, it as a severe case and report that to be handled with care. So that's a change in Japanese society.
So that was a recognition of 2 different types of bullying.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to, yes, go ahead.
Yes, James, I just got a message now that we have 2 minutes to wrap up. And I must say, I find this role that you have bullied me into quite difficult.
I'm sorry for putting you into it. We haven't really overall addressed the questions that we were to answer.
No.
But we did, but we were like an airplane looking to land, circling an airport. So I think if all you could do is report back to the group that we were you know, the highlights of our conversation. I think that's as much as we can expect to do today.
Yeah.
Just as you noted them yourself. Is that okay?
I'll do my best.
And other members of the group. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's. I also had a comment on actually that regards the question that we were supposed to discuss, because I think it is. We have had too little focus on actually the context and the institution, because in a very socially diverse schools, there are just by coming from one special social group, you have your place in the hierarchy. And I think we have not paid enough attention to this. So I think it's a very interesting question.
Yes, I think that builds on what Frode was saying there a minute ago, and explains also a bit of what Yuichi was telling us is happening in Japan, where they've recognized the different contexts. So I think context is something that's coming across as being important from our group maybe today. But we really only have to report back that we've only started this conversation. We haven't gone too far down the road of answering the questions. So with 7 seconds left, I think, according to the clock here, thanks everyone for participating. And we're just tipping the iceberg today, getting the conversation started. And we're going back to the big room now. Thank you.
Yes, that's magic. Way back in plenary. So I hope like everybody's here. Yeah, I can see 32 people. So I hope you enjoyed the discussions within the group. I was in group 3. I did enjoy a lot this discussion. So now we have the report back from the small groups. And as I said before, each rapporteur has 3 minutes. And basically, so you have to focus. I don't know if you had time to do ranking. If you didn't, it's up to the rapporteur to choose the 2 most important positive implications of the change that you discussed, and the top 2 potential negative consequences. So please mention the change or changes you discussed before. And we're going to start with group 1 that was facilitated by James. Who was the rapporteur in group 1?
That's me.
Okay, so please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. It was a very interesting question to discuss, but as it usually is when you are going to discuss these large questions, we need to sort of agree on what to discuss. So I'm afraid I don't have 2 positive implications or 2 negative implications, because we didn't really get to that. But we discussed the importance. Well, first of all, it's also important to maybe to talk about why do we need a new definition of bullying, and what kind of behavior bullying behavior is, and also to look at it from a more holistic view, and to be able to see that or to recognize that there is a power imbalance in the structure itself. And if instead of looking at it as an individual power imbalance or a power imbalance that is just between individuals, it is between individuals, because the system can also maybe even produce this imbalance. Or at least it can sustain it if the institution is not fully aware of what is going on. And also,
you have 1 minute left.
1 minute left. Okay, it is relational, but it's also structural. And also, we had this one important or an interesting thing about what kind of definition are we looking for? Is it to use in the practice, for the practice field, or is it for research purposes, or are we aiming to have a definition of bullying that can be used both for the practitioners and for researchers? Well, and this is probably just a few things of what I hope the rest of the group recognize what we have talked about.
Thank you. Well, I think that even if you didn't talk about positive implications, you raised very, very important questions, like the one you just like, is it a definition for practitioners? Is it a definition for researchers, or is it a definition for the whole world? So definitely that's something that should be taken into consideration in the process that will follow up on this meeting, and that will lead to the World Anti-Bullying Forum. So thank you very much for this. We'll now move to group 2, who was facilitated by Christian, who is the rapporteur for group 2. Please.
Marilyn?
Okay, please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, so we were discussing, should we put the absence of care into the definition, in that we are looking at more of a positive psychological model and not just aggression, and that if we could replace having a kind community in a school rather than schools punishing aggression. But that discussion led on to, well, if bullying is actually a behavioral, if bullying is a behavior, that it is a socio-ecological in society, and schools are a microcosm of society, do we actually have to have a caring society that doesn't have all of this aggression before we can change schools? Or can we actually lead and change schools first? and that was a big problem. We also decided that the putting the absence of care into the definition probably wasn't necessary, because the description, the definition should be descriptive. But the positive thing was that the absence of putting care in is much more for strategies for interventions and maybe explanations rather than descriptions. And just as Jane had said, we then looked at, for whom is this definition supposed to be? If it's for teachers, then we looked at, well, is it intentional or accidental? Then we also looked at how are they going to actually deal with it? And it doesn't matter if UNESCO writes beautiful reports and all of our governments and our policymakers write all of these things and we do all our research. If it doesn't get filtered down to the schools and to the teachers, then the definition, a working definition that they can hold in their heads and apply to actual behaviours in the classroom and in the playground is not going to make any difference for prevention and intervention.
Thank you very much. You did a good job. I mean, it took you 3 minutes, so thanks a lot. So now we're going to move to group 3, was facilitated by Dorothy, and it's going to be Donna Cross, who is going to report. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everyone. I want everybody to know that I didn't realize that this meant I had to report back, but here we go. Our group focused on repetition, whether repetition needed to occur or whether just fear of repetition would be considered part of the bullying definition. And we also focused on intention and whether intention was a key part of that. Our group came up with many positive implications and negative implications of repetition being defined as is proposed. There was a sense that it was more inclusive, that allowed only those for which it happened once but felt threatened to be considered as part of that definition. There was a view that sometimes the number, 2 or more times, might be used as a way to classify bullying, and was therefore used by young people or even by teachers, as that's not yet bullying because it hasn't occurred a number of times. There was a view that it allowed cyber or online bullying to be more easily included in the definition, particularly because of the sharing component. And then there were a number of other positives that were perhaps not as strongly presented. The negatives were that, or the 2 most important perhaps, were that it's more challenging to differentiate between conflict or aggressive behaviour and bullying if we remove repetition as part of the bullying. And the suggestion that perhaps if the target was more paranoid and had an exaggerated sense of fear related to bullying, that perhaps that might lead to bullying being overclassified. And obviously there were different perspectives of repetition from both the victims and the targets, so that made it difficult to address. In terms of intention and its impact related to group dynamics, perhaps one of the positives that the group emphasised was that you don't have to have intention. You could just be behaving badly, modelling others, that it's the normative effect. So intention doesn't allow, having intention included in the definition doesn't allow for people who might just be being influenced by their immediate environment.
You have 30 seconds left.
Thank you. And a negative of intentionality is that it's really difficult to define, and therefore a positive is that not having it in there makes it easier to measure. I'm sorry, there were many other suggestions people had that I didn't cover. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Donna. And we're going to move now to group 4, facilitated by Elizabeth, who was the the rapport. Who is the rapporteur for group 4?
That's me.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, and as many other groups, we had also had discussions of various things, but our main focus was the intent, and if the definition should add that intent is influenced by group dynamics. And one of the things that we spoke about was that we were positive to this, but we also had a discussion about the wording, that maybe it should be tweaked even more, because the phrase group dynamics puts focus on individuals in a group. So maybe it's yet again focus on the individuals, behavior of the individuals, rather than we were looking at other terms like cultural dynamics, or and also the thing that we heard from Elizabeth before about how it can also be behavior that gives you privilege. For example, if there's a person in a school that acts in a sexist way against another student to gain privilege or maintain privilege, it can still be with no intention to harm. It's a part of that group dynamics, but that maybe we need to tweak the wording a little bit more. But we think that would give very positive implications to practitioners and policy levels, but also that it needs to be something that is clear for the ones working, like Marilyn mentioned before. For example, I mentioned that in Sweden, the Education Act doesn't say that it has to be intentional. The school have to act if the ones being subjected feels intimidated or degraded in any way, then there's an obligation for the school to act, which is positive in many ways, but also have, of course, some problems around that. We also spoke about...
you have 1 minute left.
Yes, we also spoke about bullying roles, that they change a lot. So that is also one of the reasons for not putting too much weight on the group, the intent influenced by group dynamics, but yeah, because the roles change. So, and they are part of the group dynamics. Yeah, I'm not sure if I got the last part right, but we had fruitful discussions.
Thanks a lot, Frida. So now we are a little bit behind schedule. So we're going to give the floor directly. I mean, I really enjoyed at least the group where I was, and I really liked all these thoughts, even if it's more food for thought. But anyway, I mean, we know it's not the end of the process. So now we're going to move directly to Robert. Robert, you will have a bit less time. You'll have 7 minutes to give us your kind of, I don't know if we want to call these conclusions, but at least your analysis of what has been discussed so far. And then it will be Magnus who will conclude the meeting. So Robert Thornberg now for his second round of comments on the discussions.
Thank you. I will just say something very short before I was interrupted. That the third community is the importance of power imbalance and how it can be related to social context, referring to the earlier presentations, that is an important community as well. So when I have listened to this whole session and also to the group discussion that I was into and how we try to come up with a definition of bullying or revise it, for me, it's kind of obvious that we need to consider what kind of meta theory we have when we are categorizing, because this is about categorizing, right? And if you look at the literature, there are two main approaches of categorization. We have the classical theory of categorization that goes all the way back to the ancient Greek logic. So here, a category is defined in terms of the set of necessary and sufficient criteria for category membership. So any entity meeting all the conditions is by definition a member of the category. And that is what we usually think about categorization. So there exists for each concept or category a set of defining features or criteria that are singly necessary and jointly sufficient to determine category membership. And categories have clear-cut boundaries. All members of the category have equal status within the category. But here we have some problems. Each criteria or feature will itself define a category. So if we talk about intention to inflict harm, how do we define that? If we talk about harm or causing harm, how do we define that? Repetition, how do we define that? Power imbalance or power or influence by social institutional context in education or absence of care. These are new categories built into the definition that we need to define. And so we need to provide a definition of harm. Those features will in turn need to be given definitions. We are faced with an infinite regress. So welcome to the world of language. Another thing is that if categories are defined only by properties that all members share, then no member should be a better example of the category than any other member. However, research within cognitive psychology as well as within linguistics drawn our attention to the so-called prototype effect. In other words, certain members of a category are judged as being more representative of the category than others. There are better examples. And that shouldn't be the case if classical theory of categorization is true. So the other main approach is the prototype theory of categorization. And here a starting point is the observation that for many categories, certain members appear to be more central, more basic, more typical than others. According to Taylor and others, categories therefore have an internal structure in that their members are not equal, have not equal status. There are better examples. We have this prototype effect. And if you look at bullying, for instance, you can say that you can point to different examples or cases of bullying in which some of them are better examples, more clearer, more typical examples than others, which support the prototype theory of categorization. So a prototype is a fuzzier set of features or criteria that all together portray the best, most typical or most central member of a category. So membership of a category can be assigned in terms of degrees of family resemblance to a prototype or by possession of a sufficient number of the typical features of the category. And the boundary of the category, the distinction between what is in and what is outside the category may therefore not be clear-cut. So when we talk about intention to inflict harm, as Olivas,
left.
Yes,
Robert.
as Olivas does, how conscious must it be? How intentional must it be? Or if we talk about harm, how much harm do we need to consider something as bullying? Or what kind of power and how much power imbalance do we need to consider something as bullying? What kind of reputation and how much repetition do we need to consider something as bullying? So the tricky thing here is that we need to think about the meta theory of categorization. And it's quite hopeless to stick with the classical one. We need to realize that language is so much vivid and the social reality is so messy that we have to stand out with this kind of complexity. So this is some thoughts that I got from listening to the presentation and taking also a part of the group discussion.
Thanks a lot.
How do we
I felt
categorize?
like I was back in college as a student. It was a wonderful, 7-minute lecture. That was great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We're going to get back the slides, please. That was really, really good. And I'm not sure I understood everything, but that was really, really very, very inspiring. So before I give the floor to Magnus for the conclusion, on behalf of UNESCO and the World Anti-Bullying Forum, I just want to thank all the speakers, the team who organized this event. There are quite a lot of people involved in this, And obviously, I want to thank all of you for your participation. The recording of the meeting will be available on the UNESCO YouTube channel. So it will be on our website tomorrow. So now, thanks a lot. Bye. And over to you, Magnus, for the conclusion.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Christophe. Thank you for a wonderful moderated session. This is not an easy task. So thank you very, very much. And thank you for all the knowledge and commitment that so many people has shown today. I'm just thinking about that that meeting objective number 3 that we started with, that I think is so beautiful phrased, like start to explore the appetite of the research community and the global anti-bullying community. And when I listen to and participate in this meeting, I feel that the appetite is very strong. There is a hunger to discuss this kind of questions, but it's at the same time also a challenge. It's not an easy task to do. That strikes me also very clearly. So I'm very grateful to be part of this and to be part of this conversation, because I think that is also something that makes us start thinking and talking and taking other people's perspective on the issues. So I'm really grateful for all the comments and all the knowledge that has been shared. So having this into the consideration, and also like Dorothy was saying, that the CDC was working for 2 years and wrote 200 pages. And this has been a conversation going on for not 50 years, but at least 20 or 30. So I mean, I'm very humble when it comes to this task. But I think it's really, really important to have a common idea on what is the problem that we are talking about. And definitions is really crucial to point out what is the problem. And then the next question is, of course, also how can we measure things and how can we change them? So when we are scheduling, like, what is the next step in this journey, is to form a working group with members of the World Anti-Bullying Forum Scientific Committee. So we will ask members of the committee to join, and also from the UNESCO Scientific Committee that was working on this definition and the revisiting from back in November, and also other people like all of you during this meeting, or if there's someone who's missing who has a very important piece to contribute, please let us know also who that could be. So to form a group of experts that feels that has a commitment and appetite, hunger to work with this issue, and also make it a workable group, so that we could be big enough to have a lot of perspectives and different knowledge, but small enough to be able to make a proposal. So we just want to invite all of you who are interested and to inform UNESCO or the WABF by email before May 17, if you want to be part of this group. So that is a wider call that we will also address. And if you want to be part of this group, or you know someone that you think that this person really has important contribution to do, please let us know. The working group shall propose a wording of the revised definition of school bullying with a full description of the rationale for all changes made in the definition, based on the consensus emerging from this meeting and further discussions of the working group. So the idea is to have a wording, a definition, a rationale. Doesn't have to be 200 pages, but should be enough for other people to react on and to start thinking about, and to start a dialogue around. Because I think in November, the 1st to the 3rd November this year, we will not have finished the process in any way, but we want to take a further step, and we want to provide a space at the WABF for more people to be in dialogue with this revised definition and the rationale, to see if this is something that people can agree on, if it's something that helps, or if there's problems, start the dialogue, continue the dialogue. So we will start this process, and we hope really that a lot of people want to join us in this. So yeah, and then we will put it into the program and have possibilities to address this even further. So that is kind of the main idea. Start to do a working group, provide a revised definition, a wording, and a rationale for why this is important. And I think really I have learned a lot of things today, and there's a lot of input in this discussion that we really need. It's not an easy task, but I think it's also very important for the field to take further steps in this. When I think back at the World Anti-Bullying Forum in 2017, we had a panel debate that Frida was also referring to, really about these issues. And there was a bit of a feeling from my point of view in the field that we are a little bit divided. And I think at the WABF in 2019 in Dublin, I wasn't there, so it's because I became a father at that time. But then we try to put people together to start the dialogue. And I think this is a fantastic example of also start to engage people from different perspectives to see how could we phrase this in words and how can we make it useful to end all forms of bullying against children. So that is the idea. And please send us an email and help us with this very important and complex task. And also tell us if you want to have a special role. I think, you know, there's a lot of skills that is truly needed in order to make this happen. So please, we're reaching out to you, and please help us. Please let us take the next steps in this important issue. I just want to thank everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge and for your commitment. Thank you also, Robert, who did summarize this. I also learned a lot from the last 7 minutes. Thank you very much. So hope everybody had a good event, and also please look for the next event that we also co-arranged the UNESCO and the WABF on important subjects when it comes to bullying. Thank you very, very much. You see where you can get more information about all the programs and the partnership. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Christoph. Thank you, everybody. It was good to see everyone. Be well.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Rana, tu me dis pour la clôture? Je pense que l'enregistrement va se faire dès que tu auras clôturé.
Je ferme alors. Allez, bonne journée.
Merci beaucoup, merci encore.
Merci à vous, merci à vous.
Merci.